Hey guys, it's your good buddy, Uncle Ben. On today's installment of FAQ You, we're going to be talking about how to decipher weird open tunings, the best amps to use for home and live use, and so much more. But before we get to the questions, let's stop in at Uncle Ben's boombox and talk about what I've been jamming out to here lately. This week I've been jamming out to one of my favorite records by the Bird and the Bee. It's called Interpreting the Masters Volume 2, a Van Halen tribute, which in my opinion is one of the ballsiest albums ever made because it's a Van Halen tribute record that features zero guitar. So I don't meet a lot of people in the guitar community that are hip to the Bird and the Bee, but they're kind of like an alternative pop duo that I've been listening to for a really long time. I guess I generally describe their music as being like very fun, dancey, synth-heavy pop stuff with great female vocals on it, and surprisingly deep harmony from time to time. A couple years ago, they did their first Interpreting the Masters record, which is a Hall & Oates tribute, which is freaking awesome, and I listen to that all the time. But last year, they dropped this Van Halen tribute on us, and I am absolutely hooked on it. It's really cool to listen through this record and hear them doing songs like Unchained and Jump and stuff like that. And to understand that even without Eddie Van Halen's iconic, legendary guitar playing, these are still just great, memorable, hooky pop songs, no matter what kind of style of music you put them in. Standing in for Eddie's guitar playing is usually some kind of either synth or vocal-based part where they'll like layer tons and tons of vocals to kind of recreate some of the chords of songs like Jump and stuff like that. And a lot of times they take some pretty extreme liberties with some of the harmony on there and kind of revoice a lot of the chords and stuff to sound really interesting and deep and jazzy. Jump is an obvious example, but also listen to the way that they do the piano chords and stuff on Runnin' with the Devil. It's strange. And honestly, I know it seems like a really odd choice to do a Van Halen tribute album without guitar on it at all, but honestly, I think that's probably the smartest move they could have done. Because I don't care who it is, anytime any of us tries to recreate an epic, legendary Eddie solo, it always falls short of the work of the master himself. So next time you're feeling a little bit of guitar fatigue, be sure to go on Spotify or whatever and check out The Bird and the Bee, Interpreting the Masters Volume 2, a Van Halen tribute. Now, I can't speak for the validity of these claims, but there's a rumor going around the internet about the absolute coolest place you can go. The people are saying patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. By supporting my channel on my Patreon page, you get access to tons of downloadable tabs, bonus lessons, backing tracks, and so much more, including prioritized questions on future installments of FAQ You. Most of the questions that we're going to be talking about on today's episode came from my Patreon page from my lovely and loyal patrons. So if you got something that's on your mind that you want to see answered on a future episode, get it answered much more quicker by joining up on my Patreon page today. Thanks. Okay, so the first question that we have today comes from my Patreon page from several different people who wanted to know my approach to dealing with alternate tunings on the guitar, like open C tuning that you see guys like Devin Townsend use all the time. So I'm actually not much of an alternate tuning kind of guy. I'm pretty married to standard tuning and stuff, but every now and then I'll pick up my acoustic or maybe like a hardtail guitar like this and tune it to something strange and unusual to help me break out of a creative rut. Let's put this old grandpa's guitar right here in open C, that way I can show you guys one of my approaches for dealing with alternate tunings. So this is open C tuning, in which all the strings on the guitar are tuned to one of the notes that are in a C chord, which is C, E, and G. So from the bottom to the top here, we got C, G, C, G, C, E. This is the tuning that Devin Townsend does everything in, but whenever I think of open C, I think about it as the tuning that Led Zeppelin used in the song Friends. It's a really cool tuning, but it can be intimidating to work in it because none of your standard chord and scale shapes work anymore. So one thing that I like to do whenever I'm messing around in an open tuning is to take this more kind of linear string by string approach with the way I visualize the neck of the guitar. So I usually start here by choosing a key to work in. Let's think about the key of C. It's a pretty obvious choice considering we're already tuned to a C. So one thing that I'm really big into is visualizing scales laterally, going left to right across a single string. A really long time ago, I learned how to play all 7 of the modes in a lateral fashion across a string. So that way I can pick a scale, like let's say the Dorian mode, right? And play that left to right like this. Meanwhile, something like a Phrygian mode would look like this. A Lydian scale. You get the idea. So I'll use my knowledge of those lateral scale patterns to help myself build a fretboard map of what's going to work in this tuning in whatever key I'm choosing to work in. Okay, so let's say we're in C major, right? That's great because this tuning has 3 C strings in it. So whenever I play that C major scale laterally across those strings, that's a good bit of the fretboard already mapped out. I can play simple melodies like that one going across any of the C strings right here because that scale pattern that I know tells me that any of these notes are going to sound cool and in key. Now let's fill in the gaps on some of the other strings. We have 2 G strings in this tuning, okay? That one and that one. If we start the C scale off from its G note, we end up with a scale that goes G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That is the G Mixolydian scale. And again, my knowledge of those 1-string scale patterns lets me know that I'm going to be playing it like this. So now I know in the key of C that all of my C strings here are going to follow their major scale pattern, going left to right, and both of my G strings here are going to follow this Mixolydian scale pattern. But there's one more string here to map out, and that is our E. If you start a C scale off from an E note, you get E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. That is the E Phrygian scale, and the 1-string pattern for that would look like this. So I guess the way that I'm kind of viewing this here is that I've essentially got 3 different modes, so to speak, happening across those strings. Ionian, Mixolydian, and the 1 Phrygian string. It even helps sometimes to map it out on paper. That way you can see potential chord shapes or spots where, you know, those straight bars and stuff are going to line up. Or you could take a simple bar chord like that and maybe add some notes into it using one of those other, you know, modal ideas on one of those other strings. Well, let's think about another key that has modes with the roots of C, G, or E, like the key of G. So in this key, our 2 G strings here are going to correspond to that major scale pattern. Meanwhile, the key of G features the C Lydian scale, right? That's the G scale starting from the C note. So our 3 C strings here are going to follow a Lydian scale pattern like this. Meanwhile, the E would correspond to the E Aeolian mode, which is the same thing as the minor scale. So across that string, it would look like this. So like I said, I'm essentially just choosing a key and thinking of every string as corresponding to a particular mode in that key. Now, of course, I'm no Andy McKee or Michael Hedges or anything like that, but that's a really cool way that I like to visualize the fretboard whenever I'm using an unfamiliar tuning. Hopefully that gives you guys some cool ideas you can mess around with too. Next question here comes from my patron, Mark Alvarado Artigas, who asks, what sort of neck profile do you like the most? Do you like them thinner or beefier? You know, the electric guitar that I learned how to play on was my brother's old Ibanez EX series, which featured kind of the typical really thin, really flat Ibanez neck. And for a long time, that was the only kind of neck profile that I wanted on a guitar. The thinner and flatter, the better. But then I spent the better part of a decade exclusively playing 7-string guitars, which of course feature a much wider fretboard to accommodate for that extra low B string. But when I went back to playing mainly 6 strings about 5 years ago, I found that my neck profile pickiness had been cured. Because really, they all feel smaller than a 7-string. I still play all my old Ibanez's, which have necks that feel like you're playing, you know, just the fretboard of a Strat or something like that. This PRS has a pretty chunky C kind of neck on it. My Les Paul's neck feels like a mechanic's forearm. It's gigantic, and I just really don't care. When it comes to the extended range stuff like 7 and 8-string guitars, I still do prefer to have a nice thin flat neck though. I find that whenever you start adding, you know, more width to the fretboard of the guitar, having a big, thick, round neck is just no fun at all to play on. But yeah, otherwise, I don't really care. Next question here is a gear-related one from my patron, Ryan Kennedy. Right now, I am a bedroom guitarist who may end up jamming with a few friends around town. I'm a big metalhead and I've always wanted a dual rectifier, but know that it's way more than I need for just jamming by myself. Should I go that route in case I end up progressing into the realm of playing in a garage band or live gigs, or just get something smaller? Good question. So there's this huge misconception, especially in the hard rock and heavy metal worlds, that if you want to go play a gig, you have to have a 100 watt head and like a 4x12 cabinet, which is just absolutely not true. So I also drank that Kool-Aid for a long time and lugged 4x12s up staircases and drug around huge 100 watt heads and stuff like that. And I'll never forget the first time that I played a cover gig and the back line was a Vox AC15. I was looking at this thing and it is a 15 watt combo amp with one speaker in it. It's tiny. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that this is going to be enough power to be heard over a drummer and stuff. I was stunned by how wrong I was. Honestly, unless you are playing arena gigs where you've got the cabinets under the stage and isolated rooms where they're mic'd up and stuff like that, you'll never get to wind a 100 watt head all the way up to where it's going to sound the best. These amps are made to run hot. They're meant to take advantage of all that power. But I've yet to meet a sound guy at any venue ever that wanted all 100 watts of whatever I was playing through blowing the heads off of the front row. Fortunately, we live in an age where more and more amp manufacturers are making stuff to suit exactly your needs, something that you can get sounding really good at low volumes at home, but then is more than loud enough to keep up with your bandmates and a drummer and stuff like that should you start playing live. So for example, even the amp that you mentioned, the Mesa Dual Rectifier, Mesa now makes a mini rectifier, which is switchable between 10 watts for good low volume home use and 25 watts, which is more than loud enough to keep up with the band should you start playing live. My favorite amp for those solutions and more is this REVV G20. This thing only weighs about like 8 or 10 pounds, so it's gonna save you a lot on those chiropractor bills. It's got a clean channel and a rip-in distortion channel, and both of those are switchable from 4 watts to 20 watts with the push of a button. That way I can get great super saturated high gain tones even at low volumes. But REVV really went all out whenever they made this thing. It's not just great for home practice and live use, it's also amazing for home recording. This amp and its clean tone pedal pusher cousin, the D20, both feature a built-in 2 notes torpedo load box and cab sim. That means that you can take one of these heads and plug it straight into your interface and start recording and get some really great live tube amp mic'd up in a room tones out of it. Check out my buddy Sean Tubbs' YouTube channel for a great demo and rundown of these things. They really are awesome. Just kind of a total package that you can use for basically anything. So yeah, in conclusion, don't really worry about having to build yourself a huge rig of doom that's unusable at home. Just get yourself a small low wattage head like this REVV G20, Mesa Mini Rectifier. EVH makes the EVH LBX, their little lunchbox head, you know. That thing is freaking awesome. One of those heads plus a good 1x12 or 2x12 cab is all that you need to get great tones no matter where you are, whether that's practicing in your bedroom or rocking out on the stage. Thank you guys so much for contributing all these awesome questions. Be sure to leave me some more in the comment section below, and those will get answered in, I don't know, probably about another 2 weeks or so when I do another installment of FAQ You. If you want to help support my channel and get your questions answered more faster, consider signing up to that super cool Patreon page over at patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. Thanks a ton for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Less clicking, more picking.